Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it is time to have a look at the first official devblog for update 1.95. Yes, we had a few devblogs during update 1.93 talking about the premium vehicles that were available as a pre-purchase idea for the Swedish aviation tech tree. Now we're having a look at one for the actual tech tree itself. This will be a reserve rank 1 Swedish aircraft, and it is the J6B Jaktfalken II. Now, something I do want to point out is something that I definitely struggle with is how to pronounce things. And with the Swedish aviation tech tree coming out, I'm sure a lot of you are going to get annoyed at how I'm going to say some of these words, but you must understand I'm just trying to do them as simply as I can. And if there are some words that I can change and do better at, that I will. One of the ones that I really struggle with is rolling R's with stuff like the Piomirski. Like, I can't do it. It just doesn't work with my mouth. So therefore, we're going to call this thing the Yacht, just to try and, smooth out some issues that some of you Scandi boys may have. So, let's have a chat about the J6B. What we have here is a very early tier plane. We're talking about a machine which started its life in 1930, so it's going to be one of the oldest aircraft in the game, but this specific version was made a little bit later than that. In 1930, the Swedish company Svenska Aero AB released the J5 Jaktfalken fighter. Now, the J5 was okay, but it wasn't as good as some of the foreign fighters which were being brought into Sweden at the time. One of the things you have to realize is during the 1930s, the Swedish aviation arm was very much reliant on other products outside of its domestic market. And then as World War II was leading up, and then during World War II, a lot of countries, not just Sweden, but also, the Dutch and also Britain, tried to focus more on their domestic products to make sure if anything went wrong, they had something to fall back on. So with the company, the Svenska Aero AB, they created the J5, and the J5, as I said, wasn't too special, but what happened was the Swedish government was looking for something to be used as a training aircraft. So Svenska took the J5, converted it into a training aircraft, and a prototype was given an in-house designation of the SA-14, and in Swedish Air Force it was named the J6, so that is where the J6 name comes from, the Jaktfalken I. It entered testing in 1930, and a total of 7 of them were built and joined the F5 in the lineup. So in the summer of 1931, the Swedish Air Force also approved the production of 3 more of these aircraft, and the newer vehicles would be completely different to the older ones. They would have much more modernized engineering involved, and they were produced in 1932, so about 2 years after the initial ones, and these were given the designation the J6A. And the J6B, which is the one that we see before us, came a little bit later when the Swedish government ordered 7 more aircraft. So this is a 1930s design which was eventually created and built, and this new series, the J6B, eventually entered service in the mid-1930s. We're talking 1935. The aircraft itself was retired in 1941. And you can imagine why, especially with, if you think about the planes running around it in 1941. This one probably wasn't really up to snuff, but it was still used as a trainer up to and even including a lot of the Second World War. Something to also point out with the J6B is they actually list the pros and cons here, which is kind of interesting. They heavily emphasize the handling of this machine, which if you've ever played low-tier aviation, a lot of the machines at low tier can just spring about the place, and also a large choice of machine gun ammo belts. That is an advantage which I have personally never heard of before. It is, instead of the large choice of machine gun ammo belts, it should be, you should have, decent ammunition belts which can actually do damage. It doesn't matter if you have a large choice of machine gun ammo belts if they all have tracers in them, or just tracer ammo and that's it. The cons are an average speed near the ground and a weak armament. So This is really the biggest drawback of this machine. The first thing about it is powered by the 500 horsepower Bristol Jupiter engine. It's a British radial, which is really cool to see, and also is armed with two Swedish-made licensed copies of the Browning M1919, so two 8mm machine guns, and that's about it. If you have a look at the bottom tier of aviation, you won't find many aircraft which have as bad armament as this. Some of the British aircraft, of course, will, but you know, if you have a look at some other reserves, especially of Soviet and others' nature, you'll be really happy to see a lot more armaments than just two 8mm. Another thing as well to talk about is they say here that it was used in the Finnish Air Force, which is, you know, kind of cool, used as a trainer, trying to mix the two countries once again, since they've taken the decision to put Finnish vehicles into the Swedish tech tree. And also, one thing which is kind of interesting here is in this little paragraph, they describe lower tier battles as sandbox matches. It would be kind of interesting to see what they mean by that. Does it mean that you just throw everybody into a pound and see what happens, pretty much what happens at high tier now? Or do they kind of mean something else, where it's a little bit more expansive, it's a little bit more imaginative, you can just throw people in and have a bit of fun? Because basically, in this little paragraph, there isn't really a lot said apart from the fact that it's describing a reserve, which this thing is. You know, it's not going to be that powerful. It's a good starter vehicle just to have a bit of fun in, but it's not something that's going to take over the skies, especially at the reserve level. Normally, I would actually say, if you just have reserves of a vehicle, especially an aircraft, it would be worth just sticking to an arcade and just flinging the things about and having a bit of fun, because to be honest, they just fly about the sky at incredible rates when we talk about them, you know, in many tech trees. It's really fun just flipping them and dipping them all over the place, and also, even though you don't have great armament on this machine, it doesn't really matter too much when you're in arcade, because you can just reload. As you can see, it does talk about the ammunition, incendiary, armor-piercing, and tracer rounds. Incendiary rounds, for me, they used to be really powerful for lower-tier machines. I think about the 7.7s from the Spitfires, and then the 7.5s from the D520s, you know, the French aircraft. And they used to just absolutely batter everything, and I even run them still on the British D520 at 2.7. They have 3mm of pen though, and that is the problem with the ones put forward. If you can't penetrate an aircraft, if you can't do damage to it, therefore you sit in a situation where you're not doing too much and you're just basically hoping for a fire. So normally I've actually switched to AP or APIT if I can at lower tiers to be able to make sure that I do damage when I hit. I'm sure these guns, since they're copies of the M1919, you should know how they feel in the game, since we do have M1990s around and 1919s around the place. So yeah, it shouldn't be too much of a culture shock to people who want to play these machines. But overall, it's a nice little machine to see. Something to also mention is, even though this one might not be the most powerful, it does kind of have a brother which is already in the game. So the one which we're going to have a look at is this, the J8A. Now, the J8A, as you can see, it has a little bit more firepower in the form of the 4.8mm. And also, look how many belts that it has. So I'm pretty sure this is the belts that it's talking about. You know, you've got the universal TAPI, not too useful. A lot of tracers in that one. Stealth, APT, TAP, armored targets, a lot of AP, and air targets, TIIAP. Do you see what I mean? Where a pro is not really the fact that it has a bunch of ammunition belts, especially if none of those ammunition belts are that good, and they all have very similar characteristics. The best one out of this is probably going to be the AP, or maybe the air targets, but I'd hazard a guess that AP is the way to go. And the reason for this is the 23mm of pen, and also the fact that you'll make sure to do damage with the 4 guns which is sat on this. If I was going to compare the J6, which is not the machine you see before you, but you know, I suppose you could call it the little brother of it in a way, even though they're not they're not very much related. I would actually compare it to the Nimrod. The Nimrod in-game that we have has two Vickers E-machine guns, the Mark 1. It doesn't have great speed, but it does have really good maneuverability. So, yeah, it's going to be one of those planes which we're probably not going to use that much. We're probably just going to have a little bit of fun in and throw it around the place. But at the same time, it's a nice little starter aircraft for people to have so they can just enjoy it, you know, by itself. Not everything has to be, you know, these top-tier crazy machines. Not everything has to be a J29D, which is designed to blow your socks off in specific ways. Sometimes you need vehicles to be part of tech trees so they either not just fill them out, but create a little bit of historic backing to what's going on. Instead of just having a system where you just play like the best vehicles at every BR, sometimes it's nice to have stuff like this J6B to be able to just go back on sometimes and just have a bit of fun. And that's how I'm seeing it. I'm not seeing this vehicle as something that's going to take over the game. I'm not seeing it as something which is just going to, you know, maul everything at low tiers. There's obviously a lot of better biplanes than this, and also 1.3 and 1.7 vehicles, you know, since this thing can't really get downed since it's at 1.0. So for me, this is just a plane to enjoy for maybe a couple of games before I get it fully researched and moving on to the next one, and hopefully a nice little building block for people who are either new to the game or people who want to get past it quickly to be able to get to the better machines of the Swedish aircraft. For me, it's more about the history of these planes instead of their usefulness in-game, so therefore I'm happy to see this machine, even though I don't think it will have a huge impact. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, J. Wilt, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, Elove Goat, and Seductive Trashcan for supporting the channel.